I want to show you some of the controls of the JVC 170U, and I also want to go into some of the menus and settings. You know, here you have your audio inputs, you have little covering, flip that up, you got your 2 channels that you can change. So channel 1, channel 2, audio input, you can set it to line mic or phantom power. For each input, you can change each input to either auto or manual. Of course, I have the shotgun mic plugged into the second input at all times. Here on the top, you have a zoom rocker, which has speed controls of low, medium, and high. You also have a record button, which you can lock, a cold shoe mount, and a tally light. The handle is completely removable. You can take it right off, as you can see, and you can have a more stealth look. All right, moving to the front of the camera, you have various rings. You have a ring to zoom. You also have a ring to focus. You have 2 levels of ND filters, which a lot of cameras have 3. This one only has 2. You have your focus assist button. You have, and you also have a time code button. And all these buttons are reprogrammable, so they don't have to be what they're set to. You have your iris controls. You also have low, medium, and high gain settings. You have your white balance switches, OIS, AE level, and shutter controls. And then on the other side of the camera, you have another toggle switch for your zoom. You have an expanded focus button, and you also have a separate record button, which you could reprogram if you wanted to. Moving inside the camera, you have the mode button, which is basically a playback button. Then you have the low lux button, the C review button, which honestly, I don't think I've ever used that button. I don't know what it does. The zebras. You have a display, status. There's buttons for everything, which is nice. You have 2 memory slots, so you can record a backup if you want, or you can record in a series. So when one card runs out, it can automatically start recording to the other. Now I switched it on, and as you can see, it takes a few seconds before it actually turns on. So I don't know, that's about 6-7 seconds. Honestly, you know, out of all the cameras I own, this one turns on the slowest. So, you know, that's a small downside, I guess. Here you can see the menu screen, you can see the display. It gives you all the information you need. You can see your audio. You know, you can see your Kelvin, you can see your f-stop, you can see how many decibels of gain you're using, the date, all that good stuff. You got everything on the screen that you think you would have. Of course, it's very nice having the audio meters for both channels. But here you go. If you go into the menu, you know, you can adjust the camera function. I'm just going to show you a few things in here that are worth mentioning. There's OIS in this camera, and there are 2 levels of OIS. So there's normal and high. I find the differences, you know, high, I pretty much, if I'm going to use OIS, I pretty much always have it on high. Because high is better for like handheld and if you're going to zoom in super tight. And then you figure the low is like if you're on a tripod, that's not the greatest. It will take some of that shake out of your shot. So that's what low is for. But the high level isn't really that great. And I have another video about that if you want to check it out. Flicker correction, I guess this is, sometimes I guess that's if you're like shooting fluorescence. And sometimes you get that flicker when you're shooting a fluorescent, under fluorescent lighting. I'm guessing that's what that's for. I've never actually had to use it. Your AE speed. So your auto exposure speed. You could set a limiter for your gain. So for this camera, I find that once you start going over like 18 gain, it really doesn't look good. Matter of fact, once you go over 15, it starts to look a little grainy. It's not terrible, but once you go over that, it starts to get grainy. So I put a limiter so that I don't go over 15 dB. And that's when you're in auto mode. So if I was shooting in auto, it would not go over 15 dB. So it has all these settings, man. It has a lot of stuff. Here's limits on the iris, how far it can open. So it's right now set to f2. The camera actually opens up, I believe, to f1.6 if I'm not mistaken. But once you go beyond f2, it starts to get really blurry and it's hard to get a good focus. So I left it on f2. You can limit the close to whatever you want. So f11 is the smallest the aperture closes to. But if you didn't want it to close that small, you could limit that. What else we got in here? We got all kinds of stuff, man. I could just go through all of this stuff. Let me find one other cool one. So smooth transition is for the gain. So with smooth transition, if I'm selecting low, high, or medium gain, when it switches from one to the other, it's going to smoothly transfer to a different gain instead of looking like a sharp step when you change it. Like this, for instance, with this camera, if I change right now my ISO, you see how it jumps? Because right now I'm using my DSLR. With this camera, it doesn't do that. It's a smooth transition from one gain to the next so that it's not that jarring jump from dark to bright. So right now, I'm switching from low gain. So this is low gain, and now I'm gonna switch all the way to high to 18 dB. And as you can see, it gradually brought the picture up instead of just doing it in steps and looking really jerky. You can change your gain levels. So the gain switch that I showed you earlier, I have the low level set to 3 dB, I have medium set to 9, and the gain set to 18. Now, it's really not doing 18 because, and the high set to 18, because like I said, 18 is a point where you get a little grain, but it's not terrible. You can also set the zoom speed in the top handle. So when you zoom with the rocker on the top handle, you can set those speeds to whatever you want. And I believe it goes all the way up to 7. 7 is very fast. That's why I don't use that, because it doesn't look very good. And then you could change what the rings do. So, I mean, you could do a lot of stuff with this. So camera function, there's lots of different functions. And then here in camera process, I'm gonna show you camera process. Here's where you can adjust the way the picture looks. So you can adjust your detail settings, and this is basically the sharpness of your picture. Notice I put mine on 0. I think by default it's on +5, which I don't like, so I adjusted that. You can adjust your master black levels. So you can take that up or down. You can make things more black, less black, you know, to kind of adjust the contrast of your picture. What else is kind of a good one here? I always leave knee to auto. I don't really, knee I think deals with like the way the highlights look or how the highlights fall off. I don't really mess with that because I don't understand it much, so I just kind of leave it the way it is. You got all types of stuff here. The gamma, you know, basically the colors and stuff. You could adjust that. You got standard and cinema. Cinema's a little flatter, not by much though. Or you could just go in here and just adjust the levels manually. I put mine at 0. I think again it was defaulted to either +3 or +5. You got WDR, which is wide dynamic range, which supposedly kind of increases or decreases the dynamic range in the picture. It actually does work. It helps a little bit. So if you're shooting in like a bright sunny day and then there's shadows you're shooting, so you're shooting a background that is really blown out and then you're shooting in the trees and there's a bunch of shadows, you can adjust this and kind of tweak the picture so it doesn't look too bad. You could adjust the color gain and make things more saturated or less saturated. So there's all types of stuff in here, man. There's a lot of different ways you can tweak your picture. You can play with this stuff for hours, and I've already done that. You can use focus peaking, obviously, to get focus. And there are zebras, so you can get your exposure dialed in the way you want. It also shoots 120 frames per second in full HD. It also shoots 4K internally. Once again, I think this is a good camera for anyone who is a videographer who doesn't have a whole lot of money to spend on a camera, I would not recommend this for shooting films. You know, you'd probably be better off with a DSLR or a better cinema camera. But I would suggest it for corporate work like seminars, interviews, testimonials, you know, promotional videos, you know, things where you don't need that cinematic look. This thing works pretty well.